everybody, and welcome to the CEM Block 2 week number 4 lesson slides on English. My name's Luke Lloyd, and today we'll be running through the lesson. So, as always, we'll be starting with a spelling test and then running on to do some comprehension, obviously, for the English lessons. Primarily, today's comprehension will be focusing on inference, a skill we have mentioned a few times in the run up to today, but today primarily focus on inference style questions. But before we get into that, let's get the spelling test out of the way. So the words that we're learning together are the test 3 words. So you can see them here very briefly. If you want a little bit of time to look over them, by all means do so now. But otherwise, I'm going to cover them up again, and we will begin with the spelling test. So if you can please get pens, pencils ready, I'll read through the words. Now, remember, the way I do this, I'll run through the words, repeating them twice as I go, and at the end, perhaps one more time, just to finish them off. Make sure, please, that not only do you know what the words mean, but also how to spell them, or not just how to spell them, but what the words mean. Try and do learn both for me, because it's quite important that we do use our spelling test as an opportunity to test vocabulary as well. Right then, starting with word number 1. The first word is assistant. I hired a new assistant the other day. Assistant. Number 2. I heard a disturbance outside. Number 2, disturbance. Number 3, you are a participant in this spelling test. A participant in this spelling test. Number 4, as a teacher, it's my job to offer you guidance and advice. The word is guidance. Number 5, the period of time when a mum is carrying a baby, we call that pregnancy. So number 5, pregnancy. Number 6, if you're good at spotting things, we would say that you are very observant. Number 6, observant. Number 7, if something is very important, if it matters quite a lot, we would describe it as being significant. Number 7, significant. Number 8, the word means that similarly if something is empty, or for example, if there was a space for a new job, so for example, if a school needed a new teacher, you would say the school had a vacancy. So number 8, vacancy, sort of meaning empty, particularly in the context of jobs, means there's a space there. Number 9, slightly scientific word. The measure of how well something floats is a measure of its buoyancy. So number 9, the word is buoyancy. How well does a thing float? And number 10, this links to vacancy, you see, because if there was a redundancy at a company, you could end up with a vacancy at that company shortly afterwards. Number 10, a redundancy, which means getting fired or retiring or no longer having a job. Number 10, redundancy. And sorry, I should say to be redundant means unnecessary. So if you're made redundant at a job, you're unnecessary, you're no longer needed, meaning normally you no longer have a job. So those are the words. So very quickly, it was assistant, disturbance, participant, guidance, pregnancy, observant, significant, vacancy, buoyancy, and redundancy. And here are the words, and here are they slightly larger. So what you can hopefully do for me is copy those down, put those there. And again, pause the video if you need more time, or of course, use your sheet. So now we're moving on to the comprehension. I mentioned this was inference. This is the part of the lesson where I'd ask you to define inference for me. I know I've covered it in a lot of these lessons. If you've not covered it before, to infer something is to work out using logic, clues, and evidence. So Sherlock Holmes is great at using inferences to puzzle out what's going on and solve the mystery. We are going to be solving our own mysteries, our comprehension mysteries, and puzzling out what's happened. And classically, there's the standard comprehension questions, which is the to comprehend, to understand. They're the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why. And they're very basic, and they tend to be who did this, and you read the name, James did this. So they're in the text, whereas an inference might be why did James do this? What could his possible motivations have been? And they're harder because they require more thought. They require an in-depth understanding, and often you need to be able to predict things, or, as I say, infer. The question we're going to be, or the paper we're going to be starting is actually from Horrible Geography of the World. These are the same people who do horrible histories, and I believe it's on page 29. You'll find it, so page 29 in your book. Let me just write that up at the top. And to start with, I want you please just to read through this page, highlight still the who, the what, and the where, but I also want you to try and pick out any inference clues that are going to give you further context. And actually, if we read through, you'll see one of them, for example, again, is shell-shocked. And in this particular piece, the kind of inference clues you're going to be looking for are perhaps terms you're going to have to work out what they mean, work out what the result of these statements are. But read it, it's a very interesting piece. It's a genuine, true story, is real story from geography. And again, quite fascinating. So read through that again, underline the who, what, and where, and any inference pieces, anything that's going to give you some more context as to what may have gone on. You can also underline things that may lead towards clues. Now, I wouldn't normally advise in the exam, but if you are looking for more clues while I pause this now, you could flip over and have a look at some of the questions, as they might give you some hints in this section. But if you can do it without, that's probably better, because that'll mean the questions are there for you. Right, guys, I'm going to ask you to pause the video here, come back once you've read it through, and you're ready to see some answers. Okay, welcome back. So let me just show you some of the things you could have highlighted. So under the who, it could have been the seismologists. They're a bit like geologists, but people who measure the strength of earthquakes. There's the Daily Globe. There were the surviving residents, the shell-shocked experts. They mentioned the 300,000 people. They mentioned thousands more. They mentioned rescue teams. Then what? Well, they give warnings, know things, might have reported, were reeling from shock, were claiming things about the earthquake being deadly, it struck without warning, things were reduced to rubble, estimated, have died, lie injured, began a frantic search, been left homeless, result in things looking bleak. And finally, where, the primarily one is Tangshan, China, or the Shattered City. And then some of the inference clues, these were the harder ones perhaps to look for, but deadliest of modern times, struck without warning, thriving industrial city, reduced to a pile of rubble, and the future looks bleak. These are all statements that might give you more information to other questions. The fact that it struck without warning. Well, what struck without warning? If something's a thriving industrial city, what does that mean it was, and what does that mean it is now? Things of that nature. So the questions, again, I'll give you some time, but I do want to just explain before you've answered them. Some of the things you underlined might help, but not only are you answering the questions, so please do write an answer here, but you're going to tell us by ticking either the PC page box or the text detective box. And what these essentially mean is if it's text detective, you think it is an inference question, a question whereby you're having to work things out from the text, that's a PC page, or if you think it is a literal answer, this is a classic who, what, when, where, and PC page just means it's there, bang, on the page, little to no extra work needed. So not only answer the questions, but decide, do you think this is a literal question or an inference question. There's one of the 5 questions, because there's 2 here and 5 here, so there's one of the 5 I think you could argue 50-50. And so, but everything else should be one or the other, very clearly. So again, pause it here, take as long as you need, and as soon as you're ready to go through the answers, we will do so together. Okay, let's have a look at them together. So, number 1, the deadliest earthquake happened in Tangshan, China. And this, is, again, is PC page. It's not an inference. You can simply just read that off the page and get the answer. So there's PC page. Number 2, expert claimed this earthquake was the deadliest in modern times because it measured a massive, so the fact that it's massive, you can infer that 8.3 must be a large number. You never know. It could be, is that 8 out of 10 or 8 out of 100? Well, the clue massive gives you that information, telling you that's a very large result. And it resulted in more than 300,000 people dying. Now, what I would say is if you're going off the fact that it was a massive 8.3 on the Richter scale, that's definitely inference. You're working out that massive obviously implies it's large. You could argue that 300,000 people is a PC page point because you're just simply reading how many it's on the page it's there. So if you're arguing either, though, this is the one where I think you could make a convincing argument for either or. Carrying on. Yes, the city was a successful industrial centre before it was destroyed because it was described as thriving. Specifically, a thriving industrial centre. And to thrive is to do very well. If a plant thrives, it means it grows big, beautiful, tall. If humans thrive, it means they do really well. They have lots of food, success. So the word thrive means to succeed brilliantly, to succeed well. And if it's a succeeding industrial centre, you know it's doing very well. And of course, it's very likely that the earthquake has damaged that, sadly. Again, that's text detective working out what thriving means in the context of the book, of the story, sorry. Number 4. Yes, the quake was over quickly, and the simple reason is because it says in seconds. It reduced the city in seconds to a pile of rubble. And again, that means it was over very quickly because it didn't take long, but in that small amount of time, it did cause a lot of damage. So that's text detective, I think, to work out that one. And then finally, rescue teams, what did they do? Well, they began a frantic search for survivors immediately after the earthquake, and that's PC page because it's right on the page. So hopefully that makes sense as the answers. Again, really useful, just get thinking, get your mind going on just what are inference questions, how do they work, how to spot them. Next one, really interesting, I really enjoy this one. So this is Night Sky Dragons. This is a very interesting story. I won't tell you where the book's from or set, although the front cover might give you some clues. In this one, again, I want you to read through. Again, you're looking for clues, inference clues in the passage, but also in the picture, because you'll notice in the text here, there's also a photograph, a picture, and you can certainly use clues from that. I think that's entirely reasonable. They've included this information, so absolutely make use of it. So again, certainly clues in the picture that simply suggest what is happening in the story. So you can still use your 5 W's as guidelines, but anything that's giving you clues about what's going on, where it's set, who are there, why are they doing it, they're all potential things you could underline. Again, I'll give you a bit of time just to go through that and do that now. As soon as you're ready to see some possible answers, come back and join me and we'll go through it together. Okay, welcome back. Let's have a look at some potential answers. So possible clues in the picture could be the clothing, the style of clothing, the hats that they're wearing, the fact that he's wearing, that he's holding a spear. That's quite a clue for one of the answers. We'll see that later. And again, in the background, there's mountain scenery. It seems like you're quite up high, looking out over a plain with mountains in the background. Clues in the text could have been the fact they mentioned the cap, the goatskin coat, the watchman. What is a watchman? Do we have watchmen nowadays, or is that a more old-fashioned thing? Snow-smothered mountains, again, that's a clue as to where. So you see it's, who, what, when, where, why. These are all things that might give you information based on those. And there are potentially more good answers as long as you're able to justify it. Looking now at the questions, we can see the first one asks us if we think the story is set in modern-day Britain. Oh, tell you what, I shouldn't answer, I'm not giving you a chance to do it. But there you go, the first one set is asks you if it's set in modern-day Britain. What do you think and how do you know? So just remember with these guys, whatever your logic is, make sure you have an explanation. And since it's given you 4 lines, you should be, I think, aiming for at least sort of 4 bullet points or 4 points, maybe a point evidence. That might get you to your 4 marks. Have a go now at these. There's question 1, 2, and 3. And 4, sorry, but also then an inference question. C, we've practiced a little bit last week if you watched the videos, but inference questions, remember, have to be a bit open-ended. You can't just get the answer by reading the text. It can be things like, why do you think, or what will happen next, or what were they feeling? It's things that require understanding. So just make sure with your question that you write, it has that extra level of depth to it. In my mind, make it a difficult question, one that they can't just be like, oh, John, it says John in the text, job done. No, make it think more than that. Okay, sorry guys, have a go. 4 questions with one for you to write yourselves. Come back when you're ready to go through the answers with me. Okie dokie. So number 1, no, the story is not set in modern day Britain, and there's lots of evidence for that. 1, it says the boy climbed the ladder that rose to the ramparts. Ramparts like part of a castle wall. We don't really have castle walls anymore, and certainly don't have ramparts on walls, which are like defending against invaders. The men are dressed in Eastern European clothing. They're in clothing that's made out of leather. One of them's holding a spear. I certainly haven't been walking around seeing anyone with spears. They also mention the fact that it's a watchman at some point. We don't really have watchmen anymore. The closest analogy I can think to would be like policemen or security guards. And again, they don't run around carrying spears. But in the old days, you would have guardsmen, watchmen on outpost looking out to make sure there aren't bandits or enemy armies coming and all sorts of things. So this is certainly, I think, set sometime in the past, and also say in probably Eastern China. And if I had to guess, I would have probably thought maybe the Great Wall of China, near the Great Wall of China, something like that, because they're on a wall looking over the plains. But again, that's just a guess, but I'm inferring from context that might be true. Yeah, snow-smothered mountains was a good clue. Can't be in England. We don't really have snow or mountains, really. Number 2, I know that the men in the picture are lookouts because 1, it says they're referred to as watchmen and lookouts are synonymous, so both of them mean the same thing. And again, one of them has a spear in his hand, which suggests he is on guard, guarding from something. You need to be armed to protect. Number 3, the men were pleased to see Yazul because they smiled when they greeted him. And obviously, if you smile, it means you're happy. And they smiled when they saw him, when they greeted him. Number 4, yes, it was probably unusual for him to get up early because they pointed out that it was early. If it's the normal time you get up, well, then that's the normal time. Early is relative, so it's obviously early for him. And again, they looked at him as if they were expecting somebody else. He was unexpected because it was early. He normally gets up. So again, some example questions here. So did the watchman tell spring had come early? How do you know? And then yes or no, that's a nice one. And the answer would be no, the watchman told you that spring had not come because it was late this year. So understanding what it means. If spring is late, what does that mean? And was Yazul wrapped up against the cold? How do you know? And this one would be a yes. Yes, it was because he was wearing heavy winter boots and his face looked like a fingertip with a fingertip poking out through the hole. The idea that he's wearing one of those big pucker pads and you can only just see sort of his oval face sticking out. I think it's quite an evocative image. And therefore, he must have been covered up with lots of clothes, if only his face is showing. So there, 2 good questions. Again, with yours, test it out on someone, see if A, they can get the answer, and B, when you explain the answer to them, it makes sense to them. If both of those things are true, or either of those things are true, you'll know you've written a good question. Okay, guys, on to the next book. We're nearly towards the end of the lesson now. We've got one little CEM style closed test to do, and so the Teacher Write closed test book is the one to go to. And I believe I need you to turn to page 42 to 44. 42 to 44. And this is the story from A Christmas Carol. 42. And this is a very famous story. It's been made into lots of movies. It's done by Charles Dickens. And it's, I believe, this particular part of the story, he's been visited by one of the ghosts of Christmas already. And he's contemplating or fearful of being visited by another. And it's a story of Scrooge, who is a miserly, ungenerous person, but learns through 3 successive interactions with ghosts of past, present, and future, learns to get into the spirit of Christmas and be generous and give, which is a lovely story. Right then, guys, off you go. Again, you're just choosing one of the 3 options. Please remember the biggest hint for these is to read before and after for context, and keep going through, try and do the whole text, skipping things you're not sure of to come back to them later. It says it should take 6 minutes, but again, for this, we're still at the beginning of the course. Please take as long as you need to get a good answer. And as soon as you're ready, come back and we'll read through it together. Okie dokie. Let's have a look. So, I'm just going to read out and I'll highlight the correct answers and try and read out the sentences as we go through. So number 1, when Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour, and to his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7 and from 7 to 8, regularly right up to 12. That means that it rung and told him that it was 12 o'clock. Then stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12? He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. Why, this isn't possible, said Scrooge. That I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. So what he's thinking is, he went to sleep at 2 at night, and then suddenly it's night time again, 12 o'clock at night. That was in bed for ages. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window to check that it's not that the sun hasn't come up. He was obliged to rub the frost off with his sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and he could see very little even then. All he could make out was it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a good stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. Again, that means it would have been a raucous stir, lots of noise, if suddenly the sun hadn't come up one morning. This was a great relief because 3 days after sight of this first exchange of pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge, or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. So what he's saying is, if he's promised money in 3 days, but then there was one permanent day or the day he stopped going, he'd lose out on money. And again, he's very much a miserly man who's currently, at least before he's learned his lessons, focused all on money. And so the first thing he thinks is, oh, if it's constant night, no more days, I'm going to lose money. Scrooge went to bed again and thought it over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. So he just couldn't get it off his mind. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all the way through. Was it a dream or not? So really exciting. He's obviously been visited by the first ghost. Hopefully you got those answers there. Again, the answers in the back if you want a more detailed run through. And also you can rewind and listen to me say it again. Hopefully I got it close enough and certainly got all the answers correct. There is homework for this lesson, everyone, so please do keep an eye out. So again, do these homeworks. And also there's another video that goes through the maths homework if that is of use to you. Other than that, I think we can safely say thank you so much for watching. We'll end there. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week for more, if appropriate. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.